From Yellowstone to the Sanjiangyuan, where Asia's three great rivers are born, national parks connect us with nature. I'm pleased to be joined on the sideline of a dialogue forum on people-to-people exchanges between China and the United States by Douglas Morris, who has been involved with China's ambitious National Park System project. With over a dozen trips to China and a role in advising his Chinese counterparts on a national park law, Doug brings personal stories about collaboration between the American people and their Chinese counterparts on how to build national parks with their distinct national characteristics. Douglas Morris, welcome to The Point. China is in this great process of trying to establish national parks, basically a national park system with multiple national parks. Right now, I would say since 2015, China has launched 10 pilot national parks to protect natural environment and biodiversity, and by October 2021, the country officially designated 5 among the 10 pilot projects as national parks. And the National Congress, which is China's top legislature, has finished the first review of a unprecedented first ever national park law in September 2024. So from my understanding, you are pretty much involved in the whole process. Help us understand to what extent, in what capacity are you involved, and how you get involved in the first place.
Well, first of all, at a personal level, I simply want to say I love parks. And I love to see parks in different places, in particularly China. So I came here in part to contribute to this idea of establishing a national parks system here. But there's no question that I came here because I wanted to see some beautiful places.
Where was the first place you set foot in?
Well, the first place was Yunnan province. We went to Lijiang to do some training. And I think pretty close to the first park I spent serious time in was Laojianshan National Park, which is a wonderful park. It's much like our park in Utah, Zion National Park, and that sort of hooked me. I went to Jade Dragon Mountain as well, which is not a national park, but it's a spectacular place, and I think it raises questions about whether that kind of resource in China should be part of the national park system. In our country, such a place would be part of the national park system. Not so far here in China.
Back then, there wasn't this idea of a national park in the American sense. I mean, the Chinese idea of a park is, you know, rocks, creeks, pavilions. You know, a national park in the American sense, I understand, is don't touch, don't leave human, right, footprints. Let nature be nature, right? So. Yeah.
Yes and no. There's over 400 parks in the U.S. There is hundreds of protected areas in China. Both countries have protected areas that run the full range from wilderness and untouched wilderness to what I call mass or industrial parks with huge parking areas, highways, restrooms, shuttle systems in China, trams and gondolas and skywalks. So we have in both countries this broad range of protected areas. In China, for many years, local provincial governments gave the label of national park to some of their favorite tourist destinations, in part, I think, to attract more tourists, because the national park label is a magnet to tourism.
But how do you see the need since 2015, especially when Chinese President Xi Jinping called for a national park system, and he wanted this new concept in China, thus bringing a spotlight into, you know, this whole idea. How do you see the need for China to start going in this direction in terms of biodiversity, environmental protection, and tourism?
My first response, and always what I've tried to advise here, is that you build so much with a policy and legal foundation for parks. When you come to a country, perhaps anybody might come to China, the first thing they'll look at on the website, if they're interested in nature, is the national park website. And it will tell you where to go and how to go. And I think China is leaning toward the value of a unified system, a brand, if you will, of parks that become part of the worldwide family of national parks.
Share with us an anecdote in your early days, for instance, the kind of cultural differences, I don't know, different ideas that stayed with you.
Well, you know, one of the things that we learn very quickly when we come to another country to share our expertise is we have to first listen and then listen some more. And we have to be sensitive to the culture. And it took me a few mistakes to fully realize that.
For instance?
For instance, my first work at Laotianshan, we were building an interpretive trail, a trail with wayside exhibits that interpreted various spots along the path. A spectacular place took us up to the top of something called Thousand Tortoise Mountain. And so we created the wayside exhibits. We identified the beginning of the trail. And then 2 months later, we came back. And the three of us who were working on this saw immediately that the local Chinese authorities had built this monstrous arch at the beginning of this trail. That's something we would never do in the US. And so we were tempted among ourselves to say, tear that down. It doesn't belong on a nature trail in a national park. And the leader of that park wisely took me aside. And he says, Doug, you're in China.
Okay.
And we do that kind of thing here. So keep your mouth shut. And we did. We learned that what was important was the mission of that place, which was to preserve and to create public education. But the characteristics of that park still belong to China. And that was, so the art stayed is the long short story of it. And we kind of maintained our friendship by keeping our mouth shut.
Well, do you find some different understanding really in terms of how national parks should look like? Is there a Chinese understanding to it, bearing in mind, or are the Chinese taking the steps to gradually understand what national parks should look like?
I wish I could answer yes or no. I don't know. I do think that in China there is, because there has not been a national park system, and in the absence of a national park system, there is not a culture of national parks. So many of these famous sites, most famous sites, give themselves, the provincial government, the city or county government, choose to label this a national park for marketing purposes. It's not necessarily a national park in terms of our own maybe worldwide perception of national parks. So the expectations of the average traveler in China is mostly what they find in these parks with gondolas and shuttle buses and skywalks. I think that's what a lot of Chinese people expect now from national parks.
Still
It's a long-standing tradition, I think. Now, what's happening with the new parks is that they have, I think, the academics, the ministry officials that have answered that question of what a national park should be are starting at the other end of the spectrum. These pilot parks that you mentioned, 4 of the 5 of them are generally just very large landscapes that are established to preserve habitat for endangered, rare, even iconic species like the panda bear, the tiger, the leopard.
Right.
So we have
the rainforest.
Exactly. And so the initial parks in China are not in line with some of those earlier, what I call industrial tourism sites, but rather closer to some of our wildlife refuges, which really give the highest priority to resource protection. The laws that are now looking at this national park law that you spoke of,
Right.
It says that parks are for public education, and I hope that we move in that direction. But it's going to be constrained, and it's going to fit the resource and the goals of the resource preservation in that park.
Of course, of course. Yeah, actually, if you look at a closer range, the first batch of national parks, they are the sources of the three great rivers for Asia, which is in Qinghai, northwest China. Then there is the park where there are giant pandas, and then there are the northeastern tiger and leopards habitat, and then there is the rainforest in Hainan, in southern China's Hainan Island. There is also the Wuyishan mountain, which is a UNESCO cultural heritage as well. So is that the kind of logic we're seeing?
There's a bit of a contradiction here that I don't understand. But for example, 4 of those 5 are huge landscapes. They put a line on a boundary around what they have set aside as a goal, and that is a national park will protect a whole ecosystem. And in order to do that, they create these very, very large parks that within them contain villages, local people living the lifestyle they've always lived.
Yeah.
Wuyishan, on the other hand, in addition to being a cultural site, is also a large natural mountain range. So that's a bit of a mix. You've got both a pretty intense visitor development experience in Wuyishan, and in addition, you've got undeveloped landscape that protects important species of animals and plants.
Yeah, I guess that's a bit of a exception, but Wuyishan, I've been there, I've done a program there because that place holds a very special place in terms of the cultural heritage, intellectual heritage. So I guess maybe that's one of the reasons. But anyway, how has it been working with your Chinese counterpart? Has the process been, besides the, you know, the
give and take, the lessons learned?
The lessons learned.
It's been a treat. You know, despite every bit of unfortunate language coming from the U.S. now, I have never had a negative experience working with my counterparts in China. And I've spent a lot of time here working in parks with people. They listen and they ask good questions and they care deeply for the resource. And then, of course, I've hosted them in the U.S. And without exception, they're a pleasure to work with.
Do you think your advice, your input are taken seriously? Do they listen and they're serious about learning from what the U.S. can offer?
Absolutely. I do think, I mean, the thing that's, that we never lose sight of is that they will take our advice and they'll apply what they call Chinese characteristics to their decision making. So what the outcome is, and I've heard many of the leaders say this more than once, is that we will create a national park and national park system, but with Chinese characteristics. And one article I read recently said that the characteristic, for example, of the 4 of the 5, well, I think all 5 pilot parks, is that they contain whole ecosystems. And that's an important characteristic. And we have not done that in the U.S. We should have, but we didn't. And now, in many cases, it's too late.
So are you saying there's something that China can probably offer for?
Oh, yeah, they're doing, you know, I said in the classroom this morning, and something that may be worth repeating here, and that is that some people label me an expert. And I hate that term because, you know, for one, I guess I'm humble enough that I don't know that much. But the label I've come up with for expert is that we are the ones who have been around for 100 years and have made the most mistakes. And so the theme of what I try to share with my colleagues in China is not just how they should do it, but in fact, all the things that we did wrong. We put development in the wrong place, we built hotels in the wrong places, we built roads in the wrong places, we built too many roads in some cases, and we try to suggest, you know, learn from the mistakes that we made and try not to make those mistakes. And so far, the models that I have seen, including in the legislation that you spoke of, reflects that advice. You know, a lot of what is happening is I think they've made good decisions, the correct decision for what they should do. The challenge is how to do it and how does this happen.
Well, we're going to leave it there. A lot more we can talk about, but that's the time we have. Thank you so much, Douglas Morris, Chairperson of Global Parks, a non-governmental organization established to connect National Park Service and other retirees with parks and conservation projects in developing countries.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And with that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.